Dr. Kgosientsho Ramokgopa is the new Minister of Electricity of the Republic of South Africa. His sole task is to end power cuts. Ramokgopa was appointed to the cabinet by President Cyril Ramaphosa last night. So what can we expect from the electricity minister? And let's get some more insights and thoughts as well about the rest of the reshuffling by the president with political analyst Khaya Sithole. Khaya, good afternoon. Welcome to today. Thank you very much for your time. Can we just begin about this new ministry of electricity in the person of Kgosientsho Ramokgopa? I'm sure by now you've had enough time to sort of crystallize your thoughts about this role. How do you see it?
Good afternoon to the viewers. So, of course, we know that the role seems to be reflecting the president's tightrope, if you want to call it that, in that at the Nasrec conference last year, the delegates of the ANC made it very clear that, look, they felt that the powers associated with the running of Eskom should be removed from the Ministry of Public Enterprises because there was a disconnect between what the Ministry of Public Enterprises was doing versus what the Minister of Minerals and Energy was doing. Rather than do that, the president then went for an option that he put to himself on the table of saying, well, actually, perhaps this would be better coordinated if it was closer to me and I paid much greater attention to it. So that is the genesis of how this ministry has come to be. It's also obviously inevitable to then question whether it helps Eskom's cause to have yet another layer of bureaucracy that it is subjected to. Because remember, in the same State of the Nation address, the president also declared that there was going to be a state of disaster in relation to the energy crisis, which then brings the Minister of Cocta into all the conversations around Eskom. So whilst we can understand the president's sense of frustration with the inability to achieve coordination and cohesion across the two primary ministries, which is minerals and energy and public enterprises, we're not sure whether taking two and making it four is actually going to get us very far in relation to the country's energy crisis.
Yeah, and that intersection is going to be interesting to watch how it plays itself out, because just for a short while, Khaya, I know we're talking about the role, not the person, but the person of Kgosientsho Ramokgopa has been one who's been seen to be doing good work in different capacities. Of course, he'll have his detractors as well, but I'm just fascinated by this, let's call it a triangle for now, where Eskom, or the issue of energy, is intersecting with two other different ministries.
Yeah, so I think obviously it's not going to be an easy task, and we must commend him at least for his bravery in putting his hand up and saying that he's willing to take on this easy task, this difficult task. So the reason it won't be easy is that Eskom's problems are multi-sectional in nature. It isn't just a matter of, oh, there was one power station that went down yesterday. It has financial problems, and also, the question of what the right model needs to be. There's also the tensions around the fact that the president himself has been championing us getting those $8.5 billion from COP26, which are supposed to facilitate a just energy transition. South Africa doesn't seem to have actually figured out what the dimensions of what it needs to do are going to be and what Eskom's role needs to be. And of course, you had a previous CEO who had a much stronger ideological orientation towards renewable energy, for example. What this new minister now has to deal with is first the question of who's going to actually be running Eskom. So the search for the Eskom CEO is probably one of the most important primary KPIs, because what that will do is that it will determine whether South Africa can actually convince someone to say, look, I understand the nature and the scale of the problems, and this is what I need to do in order to tackle it. If we have a paralysis in the position of the CEO, in other words, it remains vacant for a very long time, it's actually going to make the situation worse. So we want to see how we manage is making sure that we cross that primary hurdle of getting the CEO. And then, of course, there are the additional pending matters that handling of Eskom that President Ramaphosa has been trying to get to 2018 is something that eventually has to be finalized. And that there's a person whose only responsibility is to deal with Eskom-specific issues, that will be one of the issues that he tackles in the short term.
Yeah, especially at this stage when we know the process to separate Eskom, divide it into three businesses, has already started, that being generation, transmission and distribution. Now, let's focus on the other new sort of postings in this reshuffle. and with a burden of expectations. I want to start with one where we in the media and generally the South African public should have an interest, and that's the communications and digital technology, because the whole issue of auctioning of the spectrum is not yet complete. And he's put Mondli Gungubele there. What should we make of that choice?
Yeah, so I think this is probably a choice reflecting the fact that he wanted the previous minister, Kgosientsho Ramokgopa, to be much closer to him in coordinating the presidency. So she is obviously one of his strongest allies, someone that he instinctively trusts. So that process of moving her in required somebody else to take over the communications portfolio. It, of course, is not an easy portfolio, because I would say there's probably about 3 pressing issues in relation to that particular portfolio. The first question is the issue of the board of the SABC, which it just simply has not been appointed, in spite of the fact that Parliament believes that it has completed its processes and submitted the names to the president. We are still not sure why he has not made the appointment, and that has obviously led to the litigation that's currently pending in front of the High Court. So hopefully that matter gets resolved sooner rather than later. There is also a very important development that happened last week in Parliament, in that the Post Bank Amendment Bill was actually passed. Now, what that simply means that we're now going to see a process of shifting the Post Bank's reporting line away from the Post Office to what we believe is either going to be the Ministry or National Treasury, so that it can become the starting point in creating what the government has decided it wants to do in the form of a state bank. So that's going to be a remarkably important part. And then the last part, as you mentioned, the completion of the process relating to the spectrum. It's been long in the making. We all understand what the importance of it is, and we just need to make sure that we get it across the line, and hopefully it translates into that great economic windfall of lower communication costs for all of us.
Okay, my producer, Zama, says I've got one more question for you because of time. Khaya, I see there's a number of new roles in the presidency. You've mentioned that it's coming out that electricity must be brought closer to the president. It's happening because Ramokgopa will be based in the presidency. We have the Minister of State Security and other functions in the presidency. That's going to be Khumbuzo, as you've said. Then we've got Marupeni Ramokgopa, the second Deputy Secretary General of the ANC, also in the presidency for planning, monitoring and evaluation. And we've got Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. I mean, she's a stalwart as well of the ANC, although we know there's been some differences there between her and the president. But women, youth and disability. Is the president centralizing power?
Yeah, that's a difficult one, because the way in which we must evaluate what the president's actual intentions are should be on the question of, once he brings these particular functionaries, or once he brings these particular ministries closer to him, does that translate to much better coordination? Does it translate to much better outcomes in relation to the portfolios? So in the absence of us being unable to objectively state that, we may accuse him of centralizing power, while it may turn out that it actually is the right thing to do. So the one benefit of what has happened in the past 5 years is that, in spite of the fact that we all think it was nothing more than a game of political optics, the president did actually put together KPIs for all his ministers. And if we want to then assess at the end of his term whether him bringing all these people closer to him actually achieve better outcomes, that must be the primary prism from which we evaluate this. Obviously, the anxiety here is that he simply brings them closer and doesn't give them that additional support or that additional capacity that is necessary in order for them to essentially run the engine room of government and provide direction to all the other ministers. You'll also remember that we've had since 2009 the Department of Monitoring, Planning and Evaluation, whose entire business model was supposed to be ensuring greater cohesion and greater coordination across government departments. The fact that he's now had to bring someone else to essentially try to revive it means that it hasn't worked as well as it needed to do. But I think it remains a remarkably critical portfolio, because if the departments and the different ministers are not talking to each other, it doesn't matter who you shuffle to where, the paralysis will linger on.